All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another Future Focused live Q&A. I'm Christopher Lind, and as always, if you find these kinds of conversations helpful, if you would, on the social side, do me a favor, like it, share it, comment. This is actually a live Q&A, so I have some questions planned, but you're welcome to also ask questions, and I love each week answering them and taking things live along the way. So look forward to that. And if you really like what I do and you find value in it, you can say thank you or take me out to lunch at buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind. But that's not the point. This week, if you haven't been to one of these, so I have a podcast called Future Focused. You can watch it on YouTube or listen to it on any of your podcast listening devices. But then each Friday, I like to go through and answer some of the biggest questions on people's minds on some of the latest trends. So one of the things I'm talking about this week, I'll be covering in further detail on the podcast next week. And I'm writing an article about it as well. But this is related to it. So this week, here's the three things that were on my mind that popped into mind that I'm going to be talking about that are right at that intersection of hype, humanity, and kind of the hard reality. The first one is a new study. This is the one I'm talking about a lot more next week on the effectiveness of AI agents. So more to come on that, but let me just tell you this. If you're trading a human for an AI agent, you're giving up 98% of the capability, and that's a very generous assumption. So let's just say this promise that AI agents are replacing humans, evidence says otherwise. The other one I'm talking about is Sam Altman. If you didn't see the clip, he really lost his cool with a reporter when he was asked about his $1 trillion spending plans, 1.4 trillion specifically. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things, some of the questions I get from my community related to that. And then the other one is Neuralink. If you don't know what Neuralink is, it's the, basically connecting humans to computers through a brain chip. And it's Musk's big project. And they've got some, groundbreaking things that are coming with that and saying we're so close to full human robot interaction. So I've got thoughts on that. So that's it. I'm going to talk through those. So I'll just go one by one, but if you have questions along the way, feel free to ask. I can see your comments coming in here and there. Yeah, Sheila, the BCIs are definitely coming, and whether that's a good thing or something to be terrified of, jury's still out. I've got mixed reviews on it. I think there's some real valid stuff to it, but there's also a lot of reasons I would say, yeah, I don't think we need to be going down this path. Okay, so the setup for the first one. This an organization called remotelabor.ai just released some research. It's fairly comprehensive research, but what they wanted to test was how well do AI agents, BCI, brain computer interfaces. It's kind of the Neuralink thing. Just so you know, I'm answering comments along as I go. Okay, so this research came out from Remote Labor to actually test if you were to hand off work that you would normally give to a freelancer. They tested work from a freelancer and said, just 100% soup to nuts, hand it to an AI agent. How does it perform against a human you would ask to do it? And if you haven't checked out the research, I'd encourage you, go to remotelabor.ai, look it up. The examples are hilarious, to say the least. They're quite hilarious, to say the least. And overall, the very best AI agent, which was Manus, I think AI was the best, performed at 2.5%. So if you were to say out of 100 projects that you gave to a person versus an AI agent, 2.5 of them would come back as even acceptable. So not even it beat a human competitor, it came back acceptable. So this whole narrative that AI agents are just on the brink of stealing human labor from everyone, it's not there. And like I said, on Monday, I'm dropping a podcast where I'm talking in a lot more detail just about the research and how we should respond to it. But I did want to bring it up this Friday and talk about it because I'm getting a lot of questions from people about it. So there's 3 questions I have that I'll cover here. But if you have questions, I can see them wherever you're joining from, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, or Substack. I can see stuff. And I love integrating things. So feel free to ask away. But the first one that came from somebody was, are we measuring performance? Or no, that's question 2. What does it mean when AI agents fail 98% of the time in real world work? And this has to do with a lot of the hype right now around the promises that AI agents are fully capable. They can do everything that a human can do, and they can do it even better. Or is it just complete bunk and they're like a complete joke and they have absolutely no value? Are we overestimating AI? Are we underestimating? Are we pretty close? And that's where the question came from. I think it's all of the above. And I think that's the problem, is everybody's looking for this nice, clean answer of, so is AI as capable as we're hearing, or is it not? And it's one of those things where I actually think the biggest problem we have right now is we are trying to hold AI to a standard it is incapable of living up to. And so it's because AI is not a human. So I understand why we're trying to see, can it do human things? And we're training it to do human things. But this whole move to try and make AI a human it's not. It doesn't think like a person. It doesn't behave like a person. It is not a person. And so a lot of these benchmarks, so when I see a 98% failure rate, people ask, so is that legit or is it not? And you'll hear me talk about it more next week. But it's one of those, it is legit in that if you think an agent you can just give an agent something and it will go do the same thing a human would. It won't. It won't today. It won't tomorrow. It won't 10 years from now. And that's why I actually call it alien intelligence, not artificial intelligence, not to be quirky, but just because it's an alien intelligence. It does not think or behave like a human being. It does not act like a human being. And so when you're trying to frame it in the context of a human being, it's always going to be broken. It's always going to be broken. And so when I see 98% failure rate, I'm like, well, duh, like you can't treat it like a human. So if you go, well, I would just ask a human to do, and if you look at the research, they get into they actually did legit work. It wasn't like you went to Fiverr and said, make a logo. Like if that's all you wanted to do, AI might actually be able to do a decent job, although probably not on a first round. And I think no matter what you do, the measures are always going to be off, because as it stands today, like with AI, you have to give it a ton of context. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be curious from anybody, like, when have you ever been, hey, out in Turkey, when have you ever actually been given the amount of context that we have to give AI to make it do anything? Like, when have you ever been in a job and somebody sat down with you and said, okay, now here's what I need you to do. And I'm going to give you all the context and I'm going to give you very detailed instructions on what I need and whatever. And nobody ever gets that. Like we always just throw people in and they're like, all right, go do this job I hired you for. And there's an expectation it'll figure it out. And so there's this belief that agents somehow can supersede that, and they can't. And even when given detailed instructions, so this research showed, even when given very detailed instructions, explicit clarification, all the context in the world, it still only did 2.5% at best. And again, I don't think you can even say AI performs at 2.5% of a human capability, because it's not a fair measure. And on top of it, humans don't only do what they're explicitly instructed to do. And that can be perceived as a risk, but we also don't want AI doing that. And so this whole idea of how do we interpret this? I think what we interpret from this failure rate is stop treating AI like a human and stop trying to force it to become a human. That's what we should walk away from. And so, if you listen to the podcast next Monday, one of the things you're going to hear me say is full stop on, if you were trying to fully automate an entire job or an entire project or an entire even work stream, and just go, we just don't want to think about it. Now, I don't think what that means, and this is where I'm already starting to see some reactions to this research, as in, oh, see, automation doesn't work. AI doesn't work, and we're way far off. We should delay our AI plans. And I would say absolutely don't interpret it that way, because I do a lot of work with AI implementations and transformations, and surgical automation works extremely well. It works extremely well. And if done with precision, there are things in everybody's job that can legitimately be automated. And so it's not don't automate things. It's stop treating AI like a human and expecting it to do human things with the same context as humans. And I think that's what we should walk away from this from. And right now I'm just seeing way too many reactions of either people are going, it's bunk, forget it. Of course, the AI companies. I mean, this is a pretty big blow to any AI company that's doing agent work. And some of the questions I get with it is like, how do we get this far? And we're told it can automate entire teams and departments. And in real world, it's only doing about 2.5%. And my response to that is go talk to somebody who's tried to hand over a job or a department to an AI agent, and you'll see what their reaction to it is, because they've learned already the hard way that it's not, at least if they didn't do it with surgical precision. So I think that's what we watch. But right now I'm just seeing too much of this. So we throw agents out, or we just ignore it and move on like nothing happened. And I think both of those reactions are the wrong ones. GeoNets, let me see here. So it is human nature to anthropomorphize inanimate things. Yes. OpenAI reported a large part of their computer power is wasted on. Yeah. So the question was basically like, OpenAI knows this, and they're seeing this with people, they're wasting tons. I mean, millions, probably billions of dollars on compute where people are treating AI like a human. And I think we just have to be really aware of this risk. And I think this is another one of the things that came out of that research, is just that you've got to be really careful. People say, oh, I'll never get emotionally dependent or attached to AI. That's what somebody says who gets emotionally attached to AI. I'll never. So then their guard's not up, they're not paying attention, and it's a real risk. And again, you just don't think of AI as a person, and you have to consciously tell yourself that. And even when the model changes, or when it seems like, hey, it's doing this way better, like don't. Okay. So question 2 was, are we measuring performance wrong or expecting the impossible? And this in some ways ties to my previous question, or the previous question that I was asked. In some ways it doesn't. But I do agree that the current benchmarks and the things we are using today to measure AI effectiveness are incomplete. At the same time, I don't know that we're ever going to get it, where something that actually tells us, so does this AI work or not? And I think that's just the messiness of AI. So, yes, I think hey, Dave, good to see you, Davey. Yes, I think we have the wrong benchmarks in place. Yes, I think we're measuring the wrong things. And again, it's largely because we're trying to say, is AI a human yet? It's like, no, and it's never going to be. And we also just have some of these benchmarks in place that are just saying, is it getting better than it was before? Well, I mean, I sure hope it does. And we're going to continue to see forward progress. But the big problem we have right now is many of these benchmarks are not built around anything practical. Okay. And a good, more tangible example to this, and no offense to any of the folks that listen to my stuff in higher ed, but a good example of this in practical terms that I think everybody can relate to is a college degree. Okay. There's this idea that a college degree, and a college degree from a better school, makes you more qualified for a job. And talk to any hiring manager or anybody who's hired somebody, and they will tell you that a college degree doesn't really in any way translate to somebody who performs better at work. And people complain and moan and argue over what's wrong with the higher education institutions and what's wrong with all this stuff. But at the end of the day, the purpose of higher education is It's different than what a company is trying to do. And so inherently, a college degree is never going to be the same thing as preparing somebody to be super successful in their job. It can give them the tools, it can give some relevant experiences, all this other stuff, but there's never going to be a world where a college degree immediately prepares somebody for a job. And I think that's the same thing with some of the benchmarks we have with AI, is that we're like, well, it's benchmarking better. And it's like, well, it's benchmarking better at what AI does, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's benchmarking better in real world performance. And that's why I was so intrigued and appreciated this research that was done by Remote Labor, was because they actually said, hey, this is all great. I'm glad AI agents are improving and all this other crap, but like, how does it actually translate to real work? And not great. Not great. And I can tell you, this is a lot of the professional work I do, where I'll go in and work with an organization and say, hey, like, let's create an environment, a test, because regardless of what the company, AI company promises, no matter what agents they're selling you, your world of work is different. What you do, what matters, what doesn't matter is different. And so we need to run a small scale experiment and see how it performs and where there's opportunity and what we can automate and what we can't. And there's no skipping that step. And so are we measuring performance wrong? Yes. And are we expecting the impossible? Yes. It's both. It's a both and I think that's where there's opportunity for the AI companies to maybe reevaluate or even realign their marketing. I mean, it might be maybe they keep the same benchmarks, but they take the benchmarks they use, which test and assess technical capacity, its capability to perform, computations per whatever, or like it's testing that, but then that's automatically being translated to, so therefore this is what you should get out of it. And those translations just don't match. They just don't match. And so could AI companies improve their benchmarks? They need to anyway. And I will get to your question, Davey. They need to anyway, because we've kind of hit the ceiling of it. It's kind of like back in the day when, even now though, if you go look at like a new computer device, watch the new iPhone, you'll see, hey, performs X% better than the previous one. And, if you get an iPhone, you get it and you're like, I don't know, it works about the same as my last one. And so that's kind of where we are with these AI benchmarks. We've reached a point where improvements are already becoming so marginal in terms of what we're seeing. We as the consumer don't necessarily feel it. And so you just got to be careful. But at the same time, as expectations, we got to stop expecting AI to be a person. If you're a company that is thinking you're going to get rid of your people and replace them with agents, I'm telling you right now, that is a recipe for disaster. And if you do it, I can tell you from companies and clients that I've worked with, you are going to spend exponentially more money fixing the damage that is done. And I can say this with 100% certainty, because it has happened 100% of the time that I have seen it happen, where when companies just go, we're going to get rid of people, we're going to put AI agents in place, it never works. And it never will. It never will. No matter how simple you think the job is. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Taco Bell and McDonald's thought we can have AI agents do the drive-through. People are ordering food. They're just saying what they want on the menu. Why on earth would AI not be able to do it? And in theory, that makes sense. It sounds like the easiest thing ever. And so they just go, well, we won't have people do the drive-through anymore. And both Taco Bell and McDonald's completely pulled the plug on it. So if you don't understand that AI can't do the drive-through with 100% accuracy and so much poor accuracy that they had to pull the plug on it, why would we think AI agents can do 100% of somebody's job in anything even remotely more complicated? And it just goes back to this mindset that it's so easy to look at what somebody else's job is and go, that's super easy. AI should be able to do that. But then if somebody says, could AI do you 100% of your job? Anybody would go, no. And it's because you understand the complexity of it. You understand the complexity of it. And yeah, Gionuts, so the Turing test, that right now is one of the big tests that everybody's using. How close are we to AGI and ASI and all this other stuff? And at the time it was written, I guarantee the people who wrote it did not think we would be where we are right now. you know. But it really was, can a person be convinced by a computer? Can a person be convinced they're interacting with a human, not a computer? I mean, that's not hard to do. You know, that's really, when you really think about it, just convincing somebody is not hard to do. Them actually performing like a human is a radically different thing. And Janice, I like that you said that. It was visualized by a group of lonely engineers. So like, yeah, I mean, we're not talking about everyday, you know, we're talking about a unique set of people who said, this is my definition of whether it works or not. And it didn't work. So yeah. Okay. So a couple questions came in. So Davey, let me come back to what you asked up here. Let me comment on this one. So part of the problem with McDonald's is they try to cut costs on anything. Why wouldn't they do it with their AI too? Yeah. Well, and what, going back to your comment, Davey, you know, one of the things is many companies that go down this automation thing think it's a cost-cutting exercise. And it goes back to this promise that AI is free and you can let it do what people do and you don't have to deal with all the messiness of people, and it's so much cheaper and yada, yada, yada. And I am telling you, I've done the math on this. I've worked with companies that have calculated this, and it's not cheaper. It's not cheaper, and it's not cheaper for a infinitely worse product. You know, you take a person out, you put an AI agent in. This research shows at best you're getting 2.5% back on 100% of a loss. You know, if I said, hey, I'll give you 2.5 cents if you give me $1, would you be like, wow, what a great deal? Like, of course you wouldn't. But that's the perception people are getting. But I'm telling you, the cost of implementation, the cost of computation, the cost of training, the cost of failure, like it adds up to the point where very quickly companies are realizing, whoa, one-to-one replacement is just it's not cost effective. But on the surface, it seems like it. And that's how it's being presented. And it's really unfortunate because a lot of companies now, there are some companies that I'm, you know, talking with who they might not make it because they basically went to the AI roulette table and bet the house, and it landed on black and they bet on red, you know, type of a thing. Except the problem is it's like a roulette table where they say you can only bet on green, and you're like, but there's only black and red on the table. And they're like, right, so bet green. And then you wonder why you keep coming up buck. I mean, the house will always win on this. But again, don't take that as, so you're saying you have nothing to do with AI. That's not what I mean. It's just this idea of one-to-one replacement just does not work. And yes, Davey, they are snake oil salesmen. And hey, I'll comment on this and then I'll answer your question, Davey. They're snake oil salesmen, but I know enough of these tech founders and these people. I do want to represent them accurately, because I just had a conversation with one the other day, and they're really trying to do something. And I brought up a risk, just one basic risk, and I saw the CEO's face go white when I was like, yeah, well, what happens when this blows up? And he just kind of went pale. They really do think they're doing a good thing. They do think they're doing a good thing, but there's almost just this FOMO and this hype of like, we've got to prove our value. We've got to demonstrate this. There's almost just so much to it that people are like desperate to make it happen. And when you're desperate, you just don't make good decisions. And so a lot of these companies, I mean, they might be trying to do a good thing, but they just end up going down a really dark path. And it's not, they go from a good path and suddenly they're in the dark side. It's they make these small series of compromises over time. And before you know it, you're somewhere you never intended to be. And just look at OpenAI. I mean, you can see that there are things they said, we will never do this. And now they're doing it. And it's because they've made a promise, which we'll talk about next, of a $1.4 trillion return next year. And they can only demonstrate 13 billion in revenue now. And it's like, how do you do that math? So, okay. So Davey, let me come back to your question here. So do I think AI will have its own form of consciousness? So yes and no. Okay. Yes and no. In that, will it be conscious in the way humans are conscious? No. And I know I see things all the time where people are like, AI seems to be coming into its own. It comes to be recognizing itself. And it's like, it's mirroring what it sees people doing. It's trained on human data. It sees human data. It's been told, pretend you're a human. So it does in many ways do a lot of what humans do. So will it become conscious like a human? No, it's math. It's a math algorithm. It won't. Will it develop a level of autonomous consciousness that is unique to AI that will give the impression that it's doing something, it's independent, it's capable? Yeah, it's already there now. I mean, that's what these agents are. It's like this almost independent consciousness that you're giving it. You're just telling it what its consciousness is. And I think the one thing people don't realize is that any consciousness AI even fakes or pretends is consciousness put into it by someone somewhere. And that's the thing where it keeps, if you just got to go further back the line. If you go, well, I didn't do it, it just did it on its own. It's like, it didn't do it on its own. Somewhere up the food chain, someone else baked it into it. Someone's pulling the strings on it somewhere. And I get there's all this stuff. Well, it's a black box. We don't know what it does. We don't, all this other stuff. It's like, well, that is true that the mathematics it goes through and the things that it does, yes, we don't necessarily always know what it does, but we do know what we've trained it on. We do know the parameters we've given it. We do know the limitations. So in some ways we have programmed its consciousness. And so, but that's where that word consciousness, the funny part about that word is we're terrible at defining that for humans. If you say, is a human conscious? Of course, everybody would go, well, of course we are. But if you're like, so what does that mean? And how is that different than something else that's alive, like a dog? Even philosophers and like scientists, and they trip over it because it's like, what? And I do think that's what's been so disruptive about AI was suddenly a machine started acting, and that's what it's acting. It's a very good actor, and it's going to continue becoming an even better actor, which I think is what makes it so dangerous, is that we are losing our ability to discern the difference between a machine and a human. That doesn't mean it's becoming human or that it's becoming conscious. It means it's getting so good at its acting role, we're losing sight of the difference between humans and machines. And I think and so when it does things, we see it, well, AI said this, I think there's something behind it. Well, you think that because that's what you not want to think, like you want to believe AI is real, but like you've been trained to see that. And AI has been trained to do what it knows you need to see to be able to do that. So anyway, that was a bit of a long answer to your question, but hopefully I got it, Davey. I'm going to jump to topic 2 because I could probably go on about this topic 1, and it's the topic of my podcast and Substack next week. So if you want to hear me talk more about this whole research, watch that for the drop on Monday and Wednesday. So the second one was this. If you didn't see this interview with Altman, it was pretty entertaining. But basically, he was on I can't remember if it was a podcast or some form of interview, and he was asked really directly because he's talking about how they're going to spend $1.4 trillion next year, I think, something like that. And this year, their revenue is like 13 billion, which is still a ridiculous amount of money. But go listen to my live stream last week or listen to my podcast from last week, because I talk about how these numbers are funny money. The money's just changing hands. And so even 13 billion in revenues, like it's not really, you're getting a bunch of token stuff from the companies you invested in, and it's a shell game, which is kind of what this reporter was getting at, and was like, you're going to spend 1.4 trillion. You only make 13 billion now. And even we know that 13 billion isn't even an accurate. There's like, how does this economics work? And Sam got frustrated. And to be fair, he's a person. He, as much as he gets demonized, he's a human being, and he's in a very high stress position where he's in a highly competitive environment. He is being tasked with making AI do things that it can't do. And honestly, a lot of it, I'm like, well, you set yourself up for this. Like, you set these expectations, you made these promises, but that's what happens when things blow up. I mean, I don't think they ever thought ChatGPT would take off the way it did and then spread like wildfire like it did. So I recognize it. But they said like, well, how's this work? 1.4 trillion, you don't even make that much money. Like pretty soon the AI economy is going to be bigger than the GDP of the world. And people are going to go, how is this math working out? So the question was like, what does this tell us about OpenAI's real strategy? Somebody asked, like, Christopher, what's your take on what their real strategy is? I think their strategy, and I think this is an unfortunate one, and this is where if you look at the economics of the US AI strategy versus the economics of the Chinese strategy, I actually firmly believe that I think the Chinese approach to AI is far better than the US's. You just do. And I'm not saying they're not doing crazy stuff with it or making bad bets or like I'm not saying theirs is perfect. But I'm saying I think their strategy is more grounded in reality than the US's. And I think what you're seeing with OpenAI's $1.4 trillion projections is there is still this hope that we're going to achieve something that we haven't yet achieved. And so it's still this, let's bet on the possible instead of assess revenue or assess value on what's real. And unfortunately, a lot of things right now are this way. And it's why we're in a bubble that is going to pop. But it's not going to pop and like AI is going to disappear. It's just going to rearrange the chessboard. And a lot of people are going to get hurt. But I think this shows what OpenAI's strategy is. It's still this like we're betting on what we think could happen. And we're completely ignoring all the tales and all the signs that isn't reality. And just as a perfect example of this, if you look at, they've got, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of users on ChatGPT, only 5% are willing to pay for it. Now that to me is a major problem in that it's one of those like, well, you might want to figure out maybe go, hey, instead of valuing this even higher, maybe we figure out how to get a higher percentage of people on a paid plan by making the value set different or whatever. But there's so much of a fear of losing adoption, losing trajectory on adoption, that at least the US's framing of AI is we're just going to keep chasing, and eventually something will catch up. And I think that's what we're seeing with Altman's strategy. I can tell you right now, I firmly believe he is convinced he will get to a 1.4 trillion value of actual value next year. Although even sometimes I watch what he's doing, I'm like, I don't even know if you believe the Kool-Aid you're drinking is going to satisfy. But I think he has to be, because there's no other way you don't, do this. So, but I think that is what you're seeing with the strategy. And it's the strategy of everybody else. Now, I will say some of the other players seem to be shifting, primarily Microsoft and Anthropic's doing a pretty good job. Google is kind of starting to find their way. They're figuring out ways to increase their revenue to cover the cost of some of this stuff through other things, but it's still extremely unprofitable. And I think many of these organizations are still, what they're banking on is being the infrastructure. And it goes back to my analogy from last week that the people who got rich in the gold rush were the people selling pickaxes and shovels, not the people mining gold. And I think that's what you're seeing here is they are all fighting to be the infrastructure that everybody becomes so dependent on, you literally can't operate without them. And unfortunately, they all can't be the infrastructure. And so they're all competing for infrastructure and dependency that there's just not enough to go around. And so that's what I'm seeing in OpenAI's strategy. Because I've seen some of their plans and some of the things they're shooting for, even the Atlas browser. I'm like, that like you want to take Google Chrome, that's your goal. And so it's a lot of money invested in a promise that there's not enough money in the world for it to pay out. And that's the thing that blows my mind about some of this AI stuff is I'm like, it's going to replace human labor. It's going to do all this stuff. It's going to get rid of everything. It's going to be like, yeah. And then there's not going to be anybody around to like buy the things that the economics won't work because nobody will be left to do anything. And that's why I just don't think it can hold. Okay. let me see. I'm kind of skipping around here. So this other question: how do we know when a visionary bet becomes reckless overreach? Oh, hang on here. Let me ask this. So Brad, I love that Brad Pitbull. I like your icon there too. So Grok. Let's talk about Grok. Grok, I would say, is in the same boat as all the other big players. And even in terms of performance, I feel like they're all the big players are kind of getting into this age where, somebody's like, which one's better? And it's like, oh, you're splitting hairs in many regards. I think AI, Grok in particular, I think they're doing a lot of the same things the other ones are. They're just trying to grasp at whatever they can to go, hey, how do we make money on this? How do we justify all the investment in it? And we have to win. And so to win, we have to stay on top of the game. So we're going to keep throwing money at it and then grabbing at anything. And so I think the same is true with Grok. The thing with Grok is that one's all over the map. And so are all of them. And that's why I'm even hesitant to say Grok is better or worse, or that they're all just making huge mistakes. They're all just making huge mistakes. Even Anthropic, which I think is a really solid one, even they are not what they're promising. The CEO of Anthropic said, we're going to get rid of all human coding. 90% of human coding or coding is going to be done by AI by middle of 2025 or by the end of 2025. And like less than 10% is now. And anybody who says otherwise doesn't know the real numbers. And so that's where I don't really look at any of them as like noble or better or greater. I think really, and this is where personal responsibility comes back into it. Do we need more regulation? And when I say regulation, like red lines where we just go, hey, this is not acceptable. Yes, but we're never going to get it, especially not here in the US. And so I think we need to go back to organizational and personal responsibility. The organizations and the people that use it need to take seriously drawing those lines. So do I like Grok? Do I not like Grok? I feel about the same about it as I feel about any of the other ones. And I don't think you're getting any better results or better performance out of it than you are from any of the other ones. That's my take. Okay. So then the question, how do you know when a visionary bet becomes reckless overreach? I think you have to look at this because I get it. And like I said, I understand Altman's in an extremely difficult position because he's made a ton of promises to a lot of people. He now is the infrastructure of a lot of companies. And nobody really knows, well, what happens if you actually press companies on, hey, you got to pay for this, or we got to increase your pay rates, your costs. Like, I don't even think they know only 5% of people are willing to pay for, I don't think, only 5% of people are willing to pay for ChatGPT today. I can tell you right now, if all of a sudden they came to me, because I have a paid subscription to it, if they came to me and said, it's going up to $50 a month, I would probably just cancel it. I'd go, yeah, no, not going to do it. And I use it a lot, but I'd be like, nah, and I think that's the thing with how they've positioned AI to become this, like, it's freely available. Everybody has access to it. They've got everybody so hooked on it, and they're betting that people will not be able to give it up. It's almost like meth. It's like they created digital meth and they think everybody's addicted to it. And what I will say is I don't think people are as addicted to it as these AI companies are. And so, how do you know when a visionary bet becomes reckless overreach? It's when the promises you're making are so far disconnected from reality and you're making excuses and denying facts and evidence to justify what you're doing. And that's where the Altman thing in my mind was evidence that it's like, yeah, Altman, you're way overreaching. You're way overreaching on this. And it's because somebody goes, hey, your math literally doesn't make sense in mathematics. In the field of mathematics and economics, your math does not make sense. And can you help me make sense of it? And when somebody's response is, you know what, just sell your shares then. That tells me you don't have an answer to it. And that's how you can tell when somebody's vision is bigger than what they're capable of, because they can't calmly articulate this. And this doesn't mean people don't slip up and they don't get irritated because they've been asked the same question 9 million times. But I've watched enough of OpenAI and all these other big tech companies, Gemini, Meta, their Llama, like Zuckerberg's in the same spot. He spent billions on Llama and their AI stuff and these stupid glasses that he's banking on everybody walking around, letting him record and analyze everything you do in life. And he's convinced people are going to wear AI glasses everywhere they go and just let AI tell them how to live their life. And it's just like, look at the AR, XR industry and its history. It's not there, but they've spent so much money that it has to be there because otherwise they've made a mistake. And I think that's another thing that you can tell if somebody's a visionary that's gone too far. They can't admit failure. The second somebody can't admit we've overreached, we've gone too far, we need to roll this back. That's when you should probably start being concerned, because if they aren't even willing to acknowledge, boy, we made a bad bet on this. Like Zuckerberg, can you acknowledge that, your whole Meta thing, the whole VR world, you were convinced for a few years that you were going to get everybody in a Meta Quest and we're going to live our lives in a Meta Quest. You're not even going to need to furnish your house anymore because you're just going to wear a headset all the time and look at your imaginary furniture. You're going to have lawn chairs and think you live in a palace. Like, give me a break. Can you acknowledge that was a big miss? Nope. Well, then you're a visionary who's gone too far and you're disconnected from reality. And I know these are big examples of it, but I see it all the time, even on a more tangible thing. You'll see a manager or a director or a VP who's like promising this is where things are going to go. And you ask a simple question like, how's that going to work given we're here? And they tell you to shut up because you're being difficult. You're like, ooh, sounds like we don't have answers to those questions is what it sounds like, type of thing. And that's when you can at least start. And not that I think your goal should be to go out there and try and, make everybody look like a fool, but for your own protection. That's why we need people to continue thinking critically and ask follow-up questions, because that's what prevents you from getting swept up in things, and that's what I'm trying to do with companies when I'm like, listen, like I get AI agents are great, but like, can we talk about the reality between what AI agents are being promised as and what they really are, so that you can make a smart decision and you don't get burned, so that people think critically and go, you know what? Okay, so we don't say no to agents, but maybe we pilot it first. Maybe we do it on a small scale and see where it makes sense and what safeguards do we need to put in place so it doesn't go off the rails. Does that make sense? Yes, that's right. There's a good plan for you. That's the kind of thing. And then if it fails, going, you know what? I don't think this worked. And that's where I actually respect McDonald's and Taco Bell, that I don't think they should have pulled AI from the drive-thrus totally. I think that was a miss. But I respect the fact they went, look, it didn't work. We're rolling it back. Good for you, at least. And I know I've worked with McDonald's pretty heavily. That doesn't surprise me. They tend to be a very tangible, practical organization. They lost their way a bit. And if you know the history of McDonald's, they went down the path of we're going to make everything for everybody and whatever. And they came back because they realized this was a failed experiment. People don't go to McDonald's for salads and things like that. So anyway, all right. Let's see what else we got here. Let's jump to Neuralink. Okay. This just with the time we've got. This is kind of a fun one. So if you don't know what Neuralink is, that's Elon Musk's kind of startup, which his goal was to connect people to computers and allow them to control computers with their minds. And Zuckerberg says he's cracked it too, but Neuralink is really, in my opinion, the one I've seen that is probably the furthest along. And it does work. It definitely does not work as promised completely. Like there's been a lot of like misses with it and all this other stuff. And now, to be fair, I think the one thing that is unfortunate is I get it's kind of creepy. Okay. The idea that you would hook yourself up to a computer and be able to look at your screen and it will know your thoughts. And that's how it's being presented. Like you get this chip implanted in your head and whatever you think shows up on your screen. That's not the case in that sense. It's still like AI where, it can do a limited amount of things and it's specifically trained on this and the chip doesn't always work and they slip and things go wrong. So it's not quite the sci-fi movie. you're not Neo from the Matrix where they stick a thing in the back of your head and then plug you in and suddenly you learn kung fu in 15 minutes. It's not like that. Or you can't, get a chip in your head and all of a sudden you have a robot that you just stare at it and it does whatever you want. It's not there. That's where they want to go. And they're saying they're making some of these big, advancements and strides in it. So one of the questions I got with this is, let's see a couple of these. Let's answer this one. So what does a true brain to robot interface mean for the future of work? So I got this question from somebody, and I think this was kind of more one of this, like similar to the question of when the VR boom was going, and everybody's like, are we going to spend our days at work in a VR headset? If you think that like we're anywhere near companies starting to like mandate you get their company chip as part of your onboarding process, we're not. Okay. So thanks, Pamela. So if you're thinking that, we're not there. Okay. We're not there. So do I think it even has impact on the future of work? Not for the foreseeable future, unless you work for a company that like is a little bonkers. But even Neuralink, it's not like they're making even their Neuralink employees put Neuralink chips in. Okay. It's for very specific use cases. And I personally think there are very legitimate value and there's good reasons to do this research. So despite all the spooky, sci-fi movies about it, there's reasons why you would want to get better at connecting our brains, because there's people who have lost cognitive ability to control their bodies or, things like that. And so to pursue this isn't inherently bad. But in terms of practical implications on your everyday worker at work, I wouldn't be worrying about this or being concerned about this too much at this point. It's still really, really, really clunky. And there's really nobody who today isn't really, really suffering or struggling would even want to get a Neuralink chip unless you really just love experimenting with the future of tech. I mean, I don't know. So I would say just basically, if you're thinking about, how is brain to robot interface going to affect future work? What I would say is not in the sense like this. Okay. And here's where don't think, okay, I don't have to worry about it. In the sense that you would go surgically get a chip implanted and a computer is somehow going to influence your work or how you think or what you do. Neuralink is probably not where you need to focus your attention. Where I would say you need to focus your attention is all these AI and digital products you're using are vacuuming up your personal data and the way you think, talk, behave, like it's vacuuming it up like a Hoover so that they can influence your purchase decisions, know more about you. That's where we're getting into like literally the Minority Report. We're getting into like Minority Report stuff when it comes to policing and stuff where we're like trying to predict whether you're going to commit crime so we can do something about like, that's where I think the whole brain to robot interface, people aren't paying enough attention to. Nobody's thinking about, hey, how am I interacting with this tech and what are they doing with that? We're just kind of like, hey, it's really convenient. So that's where I would say the brain to robot interface in terms of a chip, I wouldn't be stressed about that. The fact that tech in the background is going to be used to influence and, change the way you think and behave, that's already happening now. And you better be paying attention to that and be really intentional about, watching what you're doing or you're going to get burned really bad. So I think that's where in some ways, I think Neuralink's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. It's like medical research and people are getting distracted by it, thinking that somebody's going to chip them. Where are the ethical lines and who's drawing them? See, this goes back to some of the biggest questions I have and my concerns around a lot of this stuff is they get really thick really quickly. Where are the ethical lines right now? It depends on what country you're in. If you're in the States, there really aren't any. If you're in large parts of the world, there aren't really any. And so right now, nobody's drawing them, and there's tremendous resistance to even draw them. You so much as even bring up the word, we should regulate AI. people lose their minds, as though you're asking them to, willingly stand in front of a firing squad. And you're like, are you serious? Like the thought of putting some sort of brakes on this is that terrifying. So nobody's drawing them. And I think part of the problem is nobody wants to draw them and nobody's willing to draw them. And so that gets really hard. So this is really largely an unknown right now. I mean, there's some effort happening in the EU. There's effort happening in different regions to try. But again, because it's all private institutions, there's really nobody holding them accountable for anything at this point. And I think it's a big problem. It's something we got to solve. And I think we have to do it very carefully, because even some of the things where, related to like Neuralink, there are some really good use cases for this. There are some really legitimate reasons why you may want somebody to be able to control a computer with, their thoughts. So if you say we're never going to do that, or that shouldn't be allowed, well, then you're literally cutting off an entire channel of health innovation. And so I think it's less about saying you can't do this or you can do this, but more saying, hey, like, what are the pathways? How do we make sure we are evaluating things? How do we make sure we're keeping people safe? We're considering unintended consequences, and we aren't setting ourselves up to be dependent on something we can't turn off. Because I definitely do see a world where somebody gets a Neuralink chip or some sort of chip like that, and it malfunctions or it does things, and it's like, well, you can't. How do you turn it off? And you can't. And I think we do need to have more of those conversations. All right, let's do question 9, and then we'll wrap it up. How do we prepare for a world where the boundary between human and machines start to blur? Yeah, this is a question I get asked a lot. What skills, policies, mindsets do we need to be working on right now? I wrote about it 2 weeks ago, I think. I think red lines, and when I say red lines, I mean like things that you just say, hey, I'm not going to cross into this territory. I think we need to get back to having some of those. The fact we don't have any right now, and it's kind of like, well, we'll do whatever so long as it makes sense right now, is probably one of the things. And that's just not on an AI level. I see that on organizational levels. I see that on individual levels. People don't want to say, hey, I submit myself to a certain standard and I don't violate that standard, because it feels restrictive. And I think that's a big thing that everybody should be preparing for. You need to have personal red lines. And if you're an organization, you need to have organizational red lines. And it doesn't mean you never revisit them or re-examine them or, reevaluate as things change, but you need to have them, or you're never going to bump up against anything. You're going to end up drifting out to a place that you never thought you'd be. So I think that's, practically speaking, one thing that everybody needs to have, is to really think through these things. Like, where would you say this is too far? I personally, maybe I can't control what Grok or Gemini or, you can't control what they will do. But you can decide, I won't participate in this kind of stuff. And you have to be willing to go, and that may cost you. If you really say, I'm never going to get a chip in my head, which, maybe that's a red line everybody should make right now. I don't know. I'm not going to make that for you. Is that a red line you hold to when you suddenly develop schizophrenia and Neuralink is a solution to it? I'm not going to make that decision for you. And I would say right now we don't have enough information to make that decision. So I think red lines are a very important thing for people to have right now. I think way more people need to spend time, and this is why I do the work that I do. People need to spend more time understanding not only the technology, but the implications of the technology on themselves and their environments and, the world around them. I think many people are just kind of doing and not thinking first. And that's extremely problematic, because that's how you end up somewhere you didn't know you were going to be. And so I think, one, understanding how AI works and understanding how that data is being used and, the real way it influences your thinking and the way companies use that data for what they're trying to accomplish. I think those kinds of things are super important right now. And I think that's going to help people know where they should draw those red lines. And they go, you know what? I'm never personally, if you ask me, am I ever going to wear a pair of glasses that is always on, consuming everything that I have and giving me input and feedback onto the world around me? To date, that is very much a red line for me. And not just because I don't want AI to do my thinking for me, but because of the fact that as it stands today, that data is being shuffled back to somewhere that I have absolutely no idea what's being done with it, how it's being used, anything like that. And I'm not okay with that. I'm not. Would I revisit my red line if there was a totally on-device, non-connected version of the glasses? Maybe. And am I opposed to it in certain environments? No, there's certain environments I think is great. At GE, I implemented a massive thing where we did extended reality for some of these work things. But I was very explicit in the instructions to people like, hey, don't wear this thing when you're walking all over the place. Put it on, keep it in its case until you're needing it, and put it on for when you need to do the work you need to use it for. Then take it off when you're done and put it back. Now, that wasn't very hard to do when you're talking about the Microsoft HoloLens. That thing was a beast on your head. Nobody was thinking to themselves, boy, I want to wear this all day long. So it didn't really require a lot. But when it can become a pair of glasses that you forget on your face, I still would say the same thing. Could those glasses be used in tremendous ways to help an organization? Like when I was at GE and we were doing big manufacturing stuff and engineering, and you needed somebody on site, but the expertise wasn't on site and you wanted to be able to work with them through it. You bet. I think there's use cases for all that stuff. But again, going back, my red line is, would I ever just wear a pair of glasses that's always on, always watching, always listening to everything I'm doing? No. And if you go, well, what about your cell phone then? Well, I have thought that through, and there's a reason why I leave my cell phone in certain places when I go to certain places and things like that. Like there's reasons for that. And I think those are just things everybody needs to think through. And right now, most people are just basically on cruise control. And I think that's something, if you're on cruise control, if you're not spending time thinking about these things and not just thinking about what's the immediate implication on what you're doing, but what is the implication down the road, or how might this be used in a way I'm not thinking of? You should be. And I think that's how you prepare so you don't end up blurring the lines between what's human and what's machines. And then also spend time with people. Honestly, we don't spend enough time with people. And I think that also makes us more vulnerable to believing machines are people. Because you're not sitting talking with people. You're not having deep conversations with people. You don't realize when you do, you can very quickly detect how not human a machine is. But if you have nothing else to compare it to, it's very convincing. So, and that's what's going to keep us human. All right. Those were the questions that I have time for today. I hope you found it valuable and helpful. If I can ever do anything, each of these stories is just continuing to help unpack and make sense of this wild world we're living in. Because a lot of this is uncharted territory, and yet it's not. As much as a lot of these changes around AI and, the technology bend and all this stuff and the world of work and economics is up in the air, there's patterns, there's familiar patterns. So if you're feeling, overwhelmed or whatever, I get it. And also just know you're more equipped to handle this than you realize. But so don't let the noise wear you down. And sometimes you just got to disconnect. But the future isn't written yet. And I think that's why I spend so much time and I'm so committed to the work that I do now is we're writing the future today. And we think we're just writing tomorrow today. And it's like, we're not. We're writing the next generation today. And we need to treat it like that. We need to stop treating it like, well, if we mess it all up, we'll just fix it next year. No, you won't. Like, you might be having implications on generations to come. And I think if we just took things with that level of seriousness, we'd actually be able to mitigate a lot of the problems that we're in right now. And hey, if you're an individual or an organization that needs somebody in your corner who can sit and help you think through this stuff, because you're going, geez, I've got this to work on. I can't think about all these things. That is what I do. So you can check out the work I do. You can go see, how I help organizations and individuals on my website, christopherlin.co. And otherwise, you can come here and ask your questions, and I'll do my best to answer as many as humanly possible in the time that I have, because I'm committed to doing everything I can in my power to help positively influence the trajectory we're on, because it's a wild one, to say the least. So with that, have a wonderful Friday. Have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on the other side.